Hello, everyone. Welcome to Collapse Club, where our topic is how are we to live in the time of collapse? I'm David Baum in Seattle, and with me today is Professor Eliot Jacobson from California. Hello, Professor.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I'm thrilled to welcome you. You are perhaps the most prominent person who actively accepts the label of doomer. You've made the explicit case for that point of view in a brilliant essay called On Being a Doomer on your website. What does it mean to you to be a doomer?
Oh, well, it's such a huge question. I really appreciate that question. For me, it's a philosophy of living. It's a positive, affirmative philosophy that we are living in end times. We are living in a time when the planet is dying, when horrific tragedies are happening all around us, and where essentially collapse of civilization and the extinction of a lot of species, possibly our own, is inevitable in the near term. And it is positive because it means we can release so many of the games, so many of the trivialities, those things that are irrelevant in life, the battles we fight with religions or political philosophies or over whether we should be a vegan or drive a Hummer. And what it replaces that with is the sense that we can turn our own lives into a pillar of service, a pillar of kindness, and do all the things that sort of are the best self that we can bring to the table, because the tough battles are not worth fighting anymore. There's only one news story, and that's the end of everything. So Queen is dead, Queen is dead. Trump's president, Trump's president. These are horrible, horrible political futures, and there's a lot of pain involved for people because of some of these futures. But for me personally, I understand that that's all part of the process of doom. And I bring to the table this mission of service, this mission of kindness, this mission of finding ways to give away everything I can comfortably give from whatever abundance I have. So that's what doom means to me, and that's being a doomer, sort of in a nutshell.
There are people who accuse us, because I am also, excuse me, I'm also a doomer. There are people who accuse us of having given up or being defeatist, or there are a variety of insults they throw at us. How does that make you feel, and how do you respond?
Well, I have a really simple response mechanism on Twitter and in general in social media. And that is that one of the parts of being a doomer is not having to fight battles, not having to fight fights. So if people want to attack me, and I get attacked from climate denialists, I got a lengthy email yesterday by someone in Colorado wanting to convince me that it's all a hoax, that kind of thing. And so there are both sides of this. There are people who like Catherine Hayhoe or want to have hope, or House Father or Michael Mann are driven by the potential for fixing this thing. So typically what I do is the first sign that that person is being antagonistic or not respectful, I just block them. If the person wants to engage in a respectful way, then it's a conversation that I'll consider having. And what I find is most of the time they'll just come at you with an attack. And so that makes the decision easy, right? I don't need to do that. That's not something I need.
What do you think motivates those people? Why is the standpoint that we're facing the end of everything? Why does that generate such hostility?
Well, we really we really are attached to this cultural paradigm that we're in of growth, of future, of legacy for the grandchildren, of these grand structures we've built of civilization going on, right? So this is a whole social construct we have, and our way of thinking is inside of these social constructs. It's sort of like the Matrix, right? We exist in these worlds that were sort of handed to us, and we've grown up and we've lived in them all of our lives. So when you start chipping away at that, you're not just chipping away at what someone believes, right? You're actually chipping away at their entire view of reality. And so that's going to be a big battle to win, right? So I don't often attempt to convince people of things. It's really not my place to do that, right? If people find out about this through whatever way they do and they want more information, I'm glad to provide it. But I'm not writing articles to say, here, let me convince you that doom is coming. What I'm doing is, and I have a whole series on Twitter, My Moment of Doom, that I put up nearly every day, which is not to convince people there's doom, but rather to try and paint the full picture of doom so that we really understand. So I curate, I spend an hour or so curating articles, because there's, now if you go on Google News at 5 a.m. like I do, and you start type in climate change or methane or something, and just what's been posted in the last hour, you get 6 pages of articles in the last hour. So this is now, these articles are just everywhere. And this news is everywhere. But many of them sort of focus on local situations or blame or hope or this or that. But if you actually say, and then there's this, right? And that's a thing that you haven't thought about before. And it might be extra sad or funny or just, scientifically deep. So I think for me, I don't want to fight those battles, right? So when you ask that question, how do I approach those people? I approach them with respect as one person to another and distance. I'm not trying to shatter worldviews. I'm not trying to take people out of Plato's cave. I'm not, trying to escape from some, help them escape from some delusion. It's fine. People want to do that, fine.
The news is pretty bad, as you say, and it's becoming more and more mainstream. Your writing contains a real feeling of sadness as well as acceptance. And I just wonder if you can talk about your journey with grief and accepting the loss of everything. How have you coped with the terrible feelings that accompany that realization?
Well, I've tried any number of these online support groups for doomers. And I don't get along with that kind of structure. So I've tried to cope in that way. But honestly, the way I cope is through service. I cope by creating habitats in my yard for whatever animals want to live here, which tend to be rabbits and skunks, blue jays, whatever habitat. We have an owl in a tree out back. I cope by doing a lot of walking. I am, even in my Twitter bio, it says Planet Walker, and that is absolutely serious. I walk, and as I'm walking, I typically will listen to some calming music. I've tried things like mindfulness meditation. That hasn't worked. I can't meditate. I don't know. It's just too active of a mind. I can't slow the thing down. But really, for me, the number one path in my life is service. I just have to honor that. It is finding anything I can do to help others. whether others is people or a nonprofit or some plants or animals. So I was working for the Wildlife Care Network when they had an emergency with their pelicans, and I spent 2 weeks, helping feed and clean the pelican cages and give them antibiotics. By the way, that happened because they were trying to figure out why did all these pelicans on the West Coast starve, right? And they determined there was plenty of food. So they're still starving. There's plenty of food and they're not sick. They don't have any sickness. They're just starving. And it turned out that because the waters were, the temperature of the waters and the currents, there was some algae growth, surface level algae growth, that was making the visibility down to the layer where the fish were just far less, you just couldn't see down, right? So they were, when they would survey the food supply, they say there's plenty, but the birds can't see it. They have to see it to dive and get it, right? So anyway, so I did that for a while, and my latest gig has been at Planned Parenthood here in Santa Barbara. So I probably spent 40 or 50 hours in the last week doing volunteer work for our local Planned Parenthood. So, I mean, those are the things that drive me. It's just finding ways to be of service that are consistent with my values. And, what else can I say? That's the world is collapsing. The world is coming to an end. So what can we do? We can find value through service, right? We can find value through trying to help, one organism, one tree, one person, do slightly better in the time they have remaining.
Let me ask you to be philosophical about that particular point, if I may. If you believe that, as I do, that humanity and human civilization are on the way out, and that life and the world as we know it will soon turn into something else that does not include us, if it's the end of the world, why bother with those things? Or more specifically, where does that value come from? Is it from God? Is it from some natural impulse to goodness? Where does the impulse to service and kindness and generosity come from?
So, I mean, this is an existential question, right? This is 150 years old. If we know we're going to die, why do anything in life? Why not? We're talking Kierkegaard, and it goes back ways, right? So there's nothing special about now for that particular question. How do we find meaning, knowing that death is ahead? The difference is that it's not our own personal death. It's the death of legacy, right? It's the death of culture. It's the death of human structures and all that we've created. And so somehow what makes this extra is that assumption that we have an attachment to all of those things, right? And that somehow it's not our personal death, but it's this more abstract death of culture and civilization that should add weight to, the moment. So it's for me, those are not relevant things. I just have to say, I don't view those as different from my own life. I mean, my own life is the starting and the ending of the experience I'm going to have of this universe. I'm an atheist. I mean, I'm actually a radical atheist, if you want to say it that way, in that I actively promote the non-existence of any sort of invisible friend. So if you have that sort of perspective, right, that there's nothing greater than your experience of the world, then the best thing you can do is try and enrich your experience of the world. And for me, building another road is not going to enrich my experience of the world, or, for me, having buildings crumble down and roads go away and be replaced by natural things, right? That would enrich my experience. So I have kind of a certain nihilism in me, which is to say that I am not saddened by the prospect of loss of infrastructure, of loss of institutions. The most beautiful things that humanity has ever created are art, whether it's visual art, music, literature, poetry, whatever it is. That saddens me directly, right? Art as beauty, right? The loss of human creation of beauty. And so if you say, what am I sad that's going to get lost, right? That's what I point to. But I don't point to civilization. I don't point to losing the Target down the street as a great loss to humanity, right? Or that eventually we're going to be a lot hungrier than we are today, probably pretty soon. So I don't know if that answers your question or raises others, but that, that's my thought.
I just find it very interesting that you have, as you say, an utterly atheist, very visible world kind of philosophy, and still you invest yourself in service and generosity. It seems like just looking at the surface of things, you might as well get what you can while you can. But clearly, that's not what you're talking about.
I think the larger context is secular humanism, right? That, and I mean, there's been lots of research that has shown, and I think Steve Pinker has put a lot of it out, and some of the famous atheists, that there is no direct connection between ethical behavior and a religious philosophy. There's no, you don't need to be religious or believe in some whatever these, I don't even know. I can't begin to describe the way that process works. That's absolutely unnecessary to essentially live a life of service and a life of personal meaning. And in fact, there is an argument to be made that it's the opposite, that because I don't have any thing out there, right, that is telling me that if I don't behave this way, I will be, bad. I am a bad person, right? Some critter out there, that actually frees me. I'm not operating under guilt or some premise of structure that instructs me to behave along, certain. And I think of the anti-abortion movement, associated with Christianity would be a typical sort of line that one might draw, right? Goodness is protection of all life, because life is valuable because God created all life, right? So once you release yourself from those sorts of connections with abstractions, and you can stand back and say, okay, now let me just look at this objectively. We have a human who is pregnant and is having a horribly sad moment in their life, and they have to make a decision, right? That is going to change their life one way or the other. What can I do to best support that person making their decision? And so I think that's sort of the philosophy that I've always operated with, is secular humanist kind of perspective tinged with nihilism.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I'd like to leave both religion and abortion and ask you.
You'll get a lot of comments about that.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about mathematics and
Yes, sir.
the modeling of climate. Your PhD is in mathematics. You mentioned that you understand how the climate models work.
Some of them, yeah.
Let me frame it this way. I am not a scientist. Math, I don't have math. What I do is I look at the paleoclimatology. I look at the record of temperature and carbon dioxide in the distant past, which lately they have very good numbers and reconstructions of that. And I see that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 420 parts per million and going up. And if you add the effects of methane, it's even higher. And you look back in the paleo record and you see that corresponds to a temperature 3 or 4 or 5 degrees centigrade higher than pre-industrial. And from that, I draw the conclusion, we've already done it. We have made the decision. It was done decades ago.
See, this is where I disagree with you a bit. I think that's a very rational perspective to take. You could certainly say that we have more CO2 today than we've had in 4 million years, that if you add the CO2 equivalent, it's even higher. And then if you look historically, what were conditions the last time we were like this? The sea levels were 100 meters higher and the temperatures were 5 to 8 C hotter. And it's certainly a very straight line to draw. But the problems that I see with that are that it's really strange. You know, a lot of climate denialists want to say things like, oh, the Earth is getting hotter, or, oh, we're in a different spot in the galaxy. But the truth is, when you go back millions of years, you really can say something about the sun having changed in significant ways, or us truly being in a different part of the galaxy. But you can also say geological things, like the quantity of ice today versus Antarctic, or even how the continents were shaped on the planet and what that does to how ice and climate is distributed, right? So there are so many variables today that are different than when those models were made, that I take those models as one ingredient, one likelihood. But I also look at what the climate scientists are saying. You know, they are predicting temperatures, at least in the near term, that don't follow those sort of numbers. So I think one of the key points also when you go back to those days is how much sulfur was in the air. You know, how much sulfates, how much, you know, those extinctions that happened back 60 million years ago took place over tens and hundreds of thousands of years as temperatures gradually rose and climate conditions on the planet gradually changed, and there were algae blooms, and there were, you know, all of these things that happened to sort of tip the planet into a different state. And what's going on right now is so different than any of those also, that it's hard to go back and say, well, we had a situation back then. Well, we've never had a situation ever on the planet that's like it is now, right? And so I just don't think we can say, well, historically it was like that, so now it's like this. I mean, honestly, if the way things are going, one could imagine, because of the rapid change in ice mass, the rapid change in, you know, the ice caps and on Greenland, that we have a rash of volcanic activity and a rash of earthquakes. You know, this rebound effect that happens because we're actually changing the gravitational fields on the planet so rapidly that the plates can't adapt quick enough. So all sorts of things could happen. But I think that while the ultimate climate will probably settle much higher, I wouldn't use that as a near-term benchmark just because it happened, you know, 50 million years ago or something. So I think that's my reaction to that.
Do you find any of the current modeling from the IPCC or other places, do you find it convincing? What do you think is the rational prediction?
I actually do. Yeah, I am. The more I look at that, and the more I take to heart who these people are and what they're trying to do. You know, you look at RCP 8.5, for example, which is sort of the worst case scenario. We're tracking that. You know, we're tracking slightly less than that, but it's a model. And you know, the only question is, are we going to have one of these tipping points suddenly break all the rules, right? Are we going to have a blue ocean event? Are we going to have the Brazil tip, the rainforest tip, and become huge CO2 emitters? You know, is Siberia or the clough rates going to give us a methane bomb? Are we going to have a super volcano explode, right? So yeah, there's all of these tipping points, and to some extent, they're not well modeled, you know, in this, and that would be an issue. But aside from the tipping point perspective on this, right, the actual sort of continuous predictions of the future of the climate, really, I'm perfectly good with it. And I mean, on that subject, I mean, one of my pet peeves is that people who say that we have already, the temperature is already raised by 2.0 C from pre-industrial times. And, you know, there's a whole group of people who want to make that argument. I mean, the IPCC makes it, originally in the first reports, they used 1750 as the benchmark. And what they said was the 30-year period surrounding 1750, that was their language, and it was kind of rough. And they said, we're going to base it on that. And then they finally, I'm going to have to say this, they saw the light, right? And they realized that they should really have a benchmark that was when we had accurate measurements taking place of temperature all over the planet. And really, truly accurate temperatures didn't begin until 1850. And so let's go from 1850 to 1900 and use that as a benchmark. And then our forecast in the future can be really pretty good, right? We really know. And then, of course, people complain that, oh, we're not basing it on the 1750, from 1750 to 1850, this or that. Well, from 1850 to 1900 to present, it's about 1.2 C, as I'm sure you know. And if you actually look at the amount of CO2 that was put in the atmosphere from 1750 to 1850, it doesn't even amount to like a single year's worth of modern CO2 levels, right? It's a small amount. And the best estimates, and the IPC has done this, and numerous people have done this, the best estimate of temperature change through that period was anywhere from minus 0.1 C to plus 0.3 C, which means our true range right now today, if you want to use 1750, is anywhere from 1.1 to 1.5 C. And so I'm happy to say 1.5 C, right? I will say, yes, we have gone 1.5 C since 1750, but don't give me this. Now, the other argument you could add to that is they will say, yeah, but the sulfates, if you were to take away the sulfates, then we really would be at 2.0 C. And that I would agree with. You know, if we do away with fossil fuels today, if we go all electric, you know, strip the lithium mines, put all the slaves to work so that we can have more cobalt, you know, and abuse the rest of the planet so we could have a 20 or 30-year delay in collapse, right, by going this way, then, you know, strip the planet of sulfates, the temperature will shoot up pretty fast. And we see this in China during the early days of the pandemic when they shut down their industry. I don't know if I'm going way off topic here, but I'm rambling a bit.
Thank you. No, it's clear that your prediction of doom is based on factual analysis of the news, of what you read, what you perceive in the world.
And also respect for scientists, because I'm a scientist, right? And I know what it means to be a scientist, to publish in peer-reviewed journals, to do the research, right? I know that. And I just have tremendous respect for these people. I have respect for their reports. I don't necessarily have respect for their opinions of their own work, but how they judge and further extrapolate their own facts, right? And many of them sort of stretch it. Once they've got it, they'll stretch it after the fact. And Michael Mann is sort of the most famous example of that.
What do you think, what kind of stretching do you think he has done?
Well, just completely negating the possibility of collapse, right? Just that, using that as a non-starter in any consideration as a consequence of his research. I think by compressing, the conversation about the future, you are hurting people, because there are many, many people who might live their lives differently if the full conversation was had by all those people in power, right? With the power to say those things.
So you think the knowledge of collapse may move people to change their lives and live differently?
Yes, I would hope the knowledge of collapse would. So the worst thing that this civilization has ever created is carpe diem, live for today, right? Carpe diem means use it, right? Go on that vacation, have that big meal, drive that fast car, right? It means have that experience, right? Carpe diem means use resources as fast as you can for your own pleasure, right? So I think that there is this idea that if everybody knew collapse, we'd have a bunch of carpe diem, right? And then we collapse even faster. But for me, that's exactly the opposite of what's happened, right? For me, the awareness of collapse has meant be of service, give, right? Be generous, be kind, find ways to help people, find ways to nurture myself, to nurture the animals around me, right? To preserve the planet for whatever remains here. So I think the fear that someone like Michael Mann has is that if you were to say collapse, people would stop doing their jobs and stop, getting educated and stop buying plastic crap that they don't need, right? And the civilization would crumble. Well, civilization's going to crumble one way or another. That's 100%. That's an absolute 100%. And if we know that, let's go about living our lives as the best version of ourselves we can for the time we're still here.
I don't know that we can do better than that. So with that, I will thank you, Professor, for joining me today and sharing your point of view.
Well, thank you so much. It's been interesting. We went a couple of places I haven't gone before in one of these interviews. So I really appreciate your kindness and your questions. Thank you.
This is Professor Eliot Jacobson. His blog and his Twitter feed are linked to in the video description below. I commend them both to you. Thank you to the viewers who have been with us today and those who are seeing the recording now. I'm David Baum in Seattle. This is Collapse Club. Until we meet again, farewell.